Today, Mary Wollstonecraft is feted as Britain's first feminist. She's so hip that her portrait has been turned into graffiti here in Newington Green in North London, the place where she lived in the 1780s. Mary Wollstonecraft's radical chic was based on a book she wrote in 1792 when she was 33, called A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. The book's title echoed that of Tom Paine's best-selling manifesto, The Rights of Man. But whereas Paine argued for the natural equality of man with man, Wollstonecraft argued for the equality of men and women. And how would she begin her sexual revolution? With a transformation of the education of girls. When Mary Wollstonecraft was in her 20s, she set up a small school here in Newington Green for the daughters of the local merchants. Her experience of teaching was to have a profound and guiding influence on her political thinking. She believed that the banal and limited education of girls was the greatest tool in the repression of women. It is time to effect a revolution in female manners, she wrote. Time to restore to them their lost dignity. Strengthen the female mind by enlarging it, and there will be an end to blind obedience. Barbara Taylor is Mary Wollstonecraft's biographer. What concrete things is Wollstonecraft calling for in terms of women's rights?
She wants women to be educated on equal terms with men, and she lays out a program for the education of girl children on the same terms as boy children. She suggests that women should have equal representation in Parliament. She certainly wants women to be seen as equal citizens in law. She wishes to overturn the oppression of women. She wishes to see women as absolute equals with men. She's the first woman to put the idea of women's rights on the political map.
Wollstonecraft was feted by the chattering classes, but how did her ideas go down with everybody else? Did she manage to transform the world for women?
Eyes fighting the grey eyes, fighting the tears. Armed to the teeth through all the words reaching all the years. I advanced across a poppy field. I saw the gleam as you raised your shield. Love screamed down with the sun behind its back. Our fathers were all soldiers. Should we be soldiers too? Soldiers go.
Started doing street art in about 2007. The early work that I used to do was pretty much all hand cut, but in recent years my work's been laser cut, and it doesn't really matter what the process is. It's to do with who it is and where it is and why it's there. I was living in London at the time, then I moved on to Brighton. But the main guy I was really inspired by, apart from the obvious one, was a guy called Blek Lerat, a French artist who was pre-Banksy, and he went around Paris spraying black and white images. I come up with the idea independently. No one tells me to create these images. So you design them, you cut them, then you spray them, and it's quite rare, I think, for people to see. Not deliberate, but it's quite unusual for people to see artists spray the work, which I'll be doing after the film at the People's Museum. When I designed the image with and sort of Roberta oversaw it. It still took about a week to cut and 2 minutes to spray, I think. So that's the beauty of using stencils as a medium to create street art. It's really important for me to place the image in the right location. So I call it psychogeography. But with Mary Wollstonecraft, I lived not far from a chapel called the Unitarian Chapel in Newington Green. So for years I used to walk past the chapel with the blue plaque on it. I think it's a blue plaque or a brown plaque. And I remember she had an association. So, and I contacted this woman called Roberta Wedge, who in Stoke Newington, who knew a lot about Mary and helped me come up with the, well, I designed the image of Mary, referencing dress from the 1780s, but I just made sure through Roberta that I was choosing the right dress and the hairstyle was correct. So she was really helpful in defining the iconic image that I've used of Mary on the chapel. So including even her height, a particular association with that building, and set up, I think, the first school for girls in the 1780s when she was probably in her 20s. And so the fact that even though the church chapel has been changed, has been altered over the years, she would have been in that building, walked past that building, possibly even where the stencil is of her now. She may have walked past the same spot all those years ago. So it creates an emotion, a sort of I don't know, sort of reflection, nostalgia. Someone told me years ago, it's almost like having the ability to stop time, which I found quite poignant. People, even over the years, have put flowers at the base of the stencil, perhaps on International Women's Day, the day of her birth or her death. And it's great to have that interaction from the community. The choosing of the image, I did get acceptance from the community to place the image of Mary on the location, even though it is a listed building. So I try and get permission whatever I do my stencils. And a lot of people might have seen my work in Manchester, and all the work you've seen I would have got permission for over the years. The interesting thing about choosing Mary is that most of the characters I've chosen are relatively contemporary characters, and I thought it was quite interesting to choose Mary because she was from that period, from the late 1700s. So I quite like the juxtaposition of putting up a stencil, a contemporary modern stencil of an historical figure. So very much ghost-like, because I think Bleck uses a quote of saying in reference to his work, it's like seeing ghosts across the street, and in this case it almost is a ghost. But I think the great thing about the use of graffiti, it's a useful tool, because I teach in schools from time to time, and it's amazing how people can get engaged about subjects and history and art and geography, whatever, through street art. And I think it's great having a powerful, strong female figure in that urban environment in central London, in Newington Green, and sort of educating. But if people started to dig and did a bit more research through that medium of graffiti, they could find more about Mary. In Manchester, you've got most of them are 20th century characters. So yeah, I think Mary is the only one outside of that century, and even from a couple of centuries before then. But I think it's quite a powerful image, creating street art, an image of a person in a dress from a different time, rather than like with Frank on Oldham Street in a suit, you know. And sometimes, you know, I don't, and it's not all serious, you know. It's obviously it's talking about Mary, but Frank's Sidebottom's a comedian. You've got John Cooper Clarke, a poet. You've got Tony Wilson, entrepreneur, and Quentin Crisp. But they're all iconic figures who are probably, even if we don't know them initially, and I'm sure a lot of people have walked past Mary and not known who she is. I think a lot of these images, you might not know who they are, but they might be in your subconscious, or you might have referenced them through popular media at the time. And it's just bringing them back to life again and remembering who these people were, what they did. And Mary did some absolutely amazing things for women, you know, and I think she should be remembered. Thomas Paine wrote a book, The Rights of Man, which is a very popular book of its time. Mary Wollstonecraft was the vindication of women, and was about equality for men and women. I suppose she was, in a way, like Arthur Rimbaud in Paris, who lived in Camden as well. It's punks of their time. They were revolutionaries. At school, I was interested in art, history, and geography, and it combines all three. With my work, it's not about me; it's about the individual, because it's photorealistic almost. It's about the person, the man or woman in the picture, and also the way street art works is that it's again, which is a threat to the establishment, I suppose. It's an accessibility to all. It's almost like a socialist type thing, isn't it? I suppose, where it's an open gallery, street gallery, and you can love it, hate it, it can get painted over, it can stay. You know, it gets painted over by artists regularly. It changes. It's meant to change. It's not meant to stay. So it's like when you go around parts of the Northern Quarter regularly, like Stevenson Square, every so months a new image pops up, and I think that's a healthy thing. It's not meant to be permanent, and that keeps things fresh and alive. Bristol has its own currency, its own money. So I've got there's about 11 people. There may have been residents, but most of the people have lived there over the years. You've got people like Robert Wyatt, Blackbeard, Brunel, Tony Benn. A few years ago, they were going to design a new £10 note, and they wanted a female on the back of the £10 note. And they actually used my image of Mary on Newton Green as one of the shortlists, as a reference to Mary. So they had people like Jane Austen. So it was great to see potentially, you know, Mary Wollstonecraft could be on the back of the new £10 note. And I think in the end they went for Jane Austen. I think they used it partly because there weren't many images. There's only 2 or 3 or 4 images in existence of Mary. But again, I think it's like with the street art, with the money, it's a way of getting images out en masse, and I think it's such a positive image to have Mary, because I think the establishment towards after her death sort of dissed her quite a lot and damaged her reputation for just being a very powerful, dominant woman. The image of Mary is on the Unitarian Chapel in Newton Green. As a thank you, I suppose, what I decided to do is to make 2 editions of 25 prints, one on a white background and one on a red background. So I gave all of the 25 prints to the Unitarian Chapel for the upkeep and maintenance of the Unitarian Chapel, but I also gave 25 prints on white to Mary on the Green, and this is a really important group to help raise money to build, to construct, design a statue of Mary Wollstonecraft in Newton Green as a memorial to her and what she represents. And so in a way the stencil that I did is like a poor man's temporary, or hopefully permanent, but reminder of Mary until they raise enough money to build the actual statue. But also I decided to make a 3rd edition recently for the People's History Museum in Manchester. on green, nodding towards the reference to Newington Green. Again, an addition of 20 or so, or 30, and half of which I'm giving to fund other future projects within the museum.